Okay, hello, Mayor Sheehan. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad to have you talking to us here at Walkable Albany about some of the issues that are important to us. We wanted to speak with you and other candidates for different races throughout the city this year to find out a little bit more about what your views are on the issues that are important to Walkable Albany. So I'll jump right into the questions. First, I wanted to ask if you can give us a little bit of your overall vision for the city's transportation system and how pedestrians, bicyclists, and public transit fit into that vision.
Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. And, I guess I would start by saying that, we know that Albany is a center for commerce, for healthcare, for government. Um, and, that's good for our economy, having people come here to work. It's good for our tax base, but it also resulted, I think, in roadways that were created to get cars as quickly and efficiently in and out of the city as possible, and kind of left those of us who live here behind. And so, my overarching vision is that we have to really reverse that trend, right? We have to ensure that we are thinking about our residents in all of the investments that we make, and our residents' safety, and our ability to enjoy the walkability that we moved here for and that we live here for. Many of us, live here in the city of Albany because we can walk to parks, we can walk to the grocery store, we can walk to restaurants, we can walk to our work, to our jobs. And so we have to ensure that when we're making investments, we're not just thinking about, the traffic patterns in and out of the city. We're thinking about those of us who live here, walk here, and bike here.
Yeah, I think that's so important that, we really have a lot to offer in terms of walkability. So, capitalizing on that, I think, is a big part of our future success. So what do you think about road diets, like the one that was achieved on Madison Avenue? What do you think that's been successful, and where do you think similar road diets might be able to be installed?
So I don't like talking about road diets, because when we talk about diets, people think about, things that they can't eat,
Right.
and that makes people grouchy. So I think that what we talk about is traffic calming, right? Everybody wants to be calm. So, I think that the traffic calming on Madison Avenue has been a significant success. I think Madison Avenue is a road that I always avoided as a driver because it was so stressful. It was just chaos. And now I feel perfectly comfortable, with driving on Madison Avenue. I feel like the speeds are much more under control. The bike lane, I know, we want to move to more bike lanes and protected bike lanes, but I think that was a successful demonstration of bike lanes in the city of Albany. And so, every time, we have the opportunity to make an investment, I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we calm traffic on this street? How do we get cars to go the speed limit? How do we get them to slow down? And how do we create safe crossings for our pedestrians?
Great, thank you. How do you see the state of real estate development and housing construction in Albany, and what can be done to bring in more residents and more properties onto the tax rolls?
Well, one of the things that our comprehensive plan talked about was creating housing near our centers of employment. And we've created a zoning code that does just that. It allows for denser development in areas of the city where we have typically seen mainly single family, and less dense housing. And that is designed to, again, create a walkable environment where somebody can literally, walk across the street to St. Peter's Hospital, to get to work. And that will help take cars off the road. So, I think that, as we've looked at the development that's happened in the city, it is happening close to those centers of employment. There's a large development happening right across from the University at Albany. There were folks in Guilderland who, were up in arms about it, but it's the type of housing and transit related and employment related housing that I think is the future of the city. And that creates investment, and it increases our tax base.
And it makes it a better neighborhood for the people who live, half a block away and now can walk to all these amenities and have a new post office or things like that. You mentioned St. Peter's. We were, pretty involved with that discussion that was happening with Stop the Stories. And, I think from Walkable Albany's standpoint, if you're going to pick somewhere to put new housing, right across the street from, a giant hospital is a pretty sensible place. So, I'm glad to hear you say that. So, how do you, kind of building from that, how do you feel about the politicization of the planning process over the past couple of years in Albany? We had Stop the Stories being very active, and there's been a lot of tension between the Common Council and the planning board, the planning department. How do you think that we can rebuild those bridges and move forward together? What do you think is a good path forward?
Well, I think it's one of those things. Everybody says that they want change, but they don't necessarily want to change, right? And so there was a lot of support for creating a zoning code that is clear, that is navigable, that really speaks to our values. But then when it comes to specific projects, I think sometimes that old NIMBYism creeps back in. And I think, what we have to do is just, we have to stick by our convictions. Building housing close to employment centers is good urban planning. And, for those folks who want to stop the stories, they're also the folks who tell me that they want more amenities in their neighborhood. Well, if you want more amenities in your neighborhood, guess what? We need more people. So you can't have, you can't keep everything the same and make the investments and provide for the development and the population density that is going to bring those amenities. People talk about what it used to be like, right? That was back when people had 8 kids, so every one of those houses was, the size of an apartment building, but, or as many people as an apartment building. And also, younger people are buying homes later. So, all of these things have to be taken into consideration if we're going to create that desirable urban center that everybody wants with the amenities that everyone wants.
Right. And, it was interesting to me listening to a lot of that debate. People brought up climate change a lot, puzzlingly as an opposition to developing more, which was fascinating because, I think of how are we going to reduce by 50% our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030? Well, we're going to have to take fewer gas powered car trips, and until we have all electric vehicles, that's going to mean fewer car trips overall. And, lots of young people say they want to be able to walk to work. They want to be able to walk to things. And, you have to build that kind of development for the demand that's there. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Changing gears a little bit, I wanted to ask what your thoughts are so far in the Washington Park traffic study that's been planned. Can you update us any bit on the progress, and what do you think makes sense to reduce the amount of car traffic or reduce the car speeds in Washington Park, and on what kind of timeline?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. I was able to have a conversation with the firm that was selected to do the study, just to answer some of their questions, because the study zone is bigger than the park. But I wanted to clarify, this is about traffic in the park. The reason that the area that's being studied is bigger is because we know that if we restrict or reduce the number of cars that are able to go through the park, that we could have impacts, and some of those unintended, in the surrounding neighborhood. So we don't want to, for the neighboring areas and streets, to think that we aren't considering those impacts as we look at reducing the traffic in Washington Park. And, I think that we have to really look at speeds through Washington Park. We have to look at the number of roads that are used by cars in Washington, or that we're really thinking forward and thinking ahead about safety of people using the park. And we also know that it is, an emergency route to Albany Medical Center. So we do have to take that into consideration, but I think we need to be creative, and we need to recognize that the goal is to make Washington Park more walkable, more, more friendlier for people who are coming there to bike, to walk, and to enjoy the amenities of the park.
Great, thank you. So from a larger perspective, well, the part of Walkable Albany's view of the world is that, cars are a leading cause of accidental deaths in America. Almost as many people die from cars every year as guns, which is, taken with a great degree of seriousness in our political discussions. What are some of the larger policies that you might like to see to try to get our pedestrian deaths down to zero? Would you support if the state would let us to have a lower citywide speed limit, or have sort of larger policies around the entire city for traffic calming to promote pedestrian safety? Or are there any other approaches that are at top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we do have to look at opportunities for traffic calming. Oftentimes, actually, probably the number one complaint that I get when I go to neighborhood meetings, and it doesn't matter the neighborhood. It's our densely populated neighborhoods. It's our more suburbanized neighborhoods. Speeding cars is always an issue. Now, sometimes, right, it's that the speed limit at 30 miles an hour is too fast,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
On a street like where I live on First Street, a car coming down our street at 30 miles an hour seems like it's speeding.
Right.
So I think we do have to look at speeds, but then we also have to look at how do we calm our drivers? How do we create, that, you know, that sense of community among people driving in our city. And I think that there are two pieces to that. One is, traffic safety and enforcement. What is the right speed limit, and how do we figure that out? And then I think the other is also on the part of our pedestrians, right? If we're going to create pedestrian crossings and pedestrian, safety zones, as people cross our wider streets, we also have to have our pedestrians following the rules as well, right? So, sometimes drivers get frustrated when they're following the rules, but the pedestrians aren't. And so some of that is pedestrian education as well. But I think, overall, it's about ensuring that we're just slowing everyone down a little bit, right? And we're all going to get to where we need to go. But I think if we all just sort of take a deep breath, and if we create an environment where that can happen, I think we can all be safer.
Yeah, and I think, I agree. You really hit on the head there with we're all going to get where we're going. You know how many times someone passes you on Central, and it seems like they're going so fast, and then you both get to the red light at the end of the block at the same time, right? And
Exactly.
we know people. If pedestrian gets hit at 40 miles an hour, there's a 90% chance they die. If they get hit at 20 miles an hour, there's a 90% chance they survive. So, it really does make a difference in terms of trying to figure out how to calm traffic. So the last question I have is, what does walkability mean to you? And if there were three things that you could pick that you would like to achieve, the top three things for walkability in the city, what would you do?
Well, I think walkability is, when you look at where your destination is, does it make sense to get there? And do we provide a clear path to get there? And so, I think that, the complete streets legislation that was passed, and the regulations that we have in place is part of the solution. And I think that we also have to be looking at, all walkers, all pedestrians. And so it's recognizing, for example, I was at Crestview Terrace, which is out on Central Avenue, which is a low income senior housing complex where we did a lot of work on pedestrian safety. But then when I went to a meeting there, they said, yeah, that's great. We're a little older. It takes us a little longer to get across the street.
Yeah.
So, and be mindful of, where our schools are, where our seniors are, so that we're really being, really laser focused on who the pedestrians are down to that level, and giving people time to use those signals and to cross the street. I think we also, again, have to make sure that, when we're making investments, we're making those investments with the pedestrian in mind. So, there are definitely areas that are really problematic, particularly along Central Avenue.
Yeah.
And I think we have to look at what would the big idea be, to create, more safer corridors, whether it's Washington Avenue corridor, the Central Avenue corridor. Western is pretty constricted in size. Madison, I think we got right. And so, I think we have to move to those other corridors. And then we have to not forget about the north-south corridors. I think there's a real opportunity on Broadway, for us to be investing in bike infrastructure and ped infrastructure, on Broadway, as well as, really looking, now that Pearl Street has had a lot of investment, a lot of new residents. Now it's time to think about, do we need to revisit, keeping our pedestrians safe in those along those corridors as well. So, I would love to think big. I would love to, create a lot more bike lanes. We don't have enough, even though, the talk radio people refer to me as Mayor Bike Lane. We're not even close to having enough. So,
Right, I
I
agree.
think that's the next big thing for us to tackle.
Yeah, no, and I think that's great. And we talked about the importance of doing that for climate change, and just for safety. And as someone with kids, I want to be able to have my kids ride their bikes around and feel safe too, right? Everybody should be able to ride a bike. Elderly folks, lots of people with disabilities like to use bikes to get around, because walking is difficult. So, yeah, the opportunity, I think, is right. Albany does have so much opportunity. We do have some really wide streets that we can use some space. So I'm really, really glad to hear that that's important to you. So thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to record this with us, and we'll see you out on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
Thank you.